Welcome to the final chapter of this series from Infinity Beyond. We've traveled through history, explored modern weapons, and examined futuristic battlefields on the Moon and Mars. Now comes the most chilling question of all. Are we on the brink of the first actual war in space? Let's be clear. No space war has erupted yet. But many experts believe the groundwork has already been laid. The world's superpowers are locked in a quiet arms race above our heads, developing technologies that could, at any moment, shift from posturing to confrontation. Several red flags are already flying. In recent years, Russia has conducted anti-satellite ASAT weapon tests, destroying their own defunct satellites and creating massive debris clouds. China did the same in 2007. The US and India followed suit. Each of these tests demonstrated not only capability, but intent. The readiness to disable enemy assets if conflict arises. Satellites have been shadowed by foreign objects, moved suspiciously close by unknown spacecraft, or even reportedly tampered with via robotic arms or jamming. These incidents don't make global headlines, but they send a loud message to military analysts. Space is no longer safe. The battlefield of the future may begin not with missiles on Earth, but with a flash in the sky. Imagine a sudden outage in global GPS systems. Planes lose navigation, ships drift off course, digital communications falter. Then surveillance satellites begin failing. Military units lose real-time intel. Ground-based radars detect strange objects approaching their satellites. Fast, silent, intentional. That is the opening salvo of a space war. Unlike traditional conflicts, a space war would unfold in microseconds. Autonomy, AI, and pre-programmed responses would dominate. Human commanders might not even realize what's happening until their systems are already compromised. And unlike war on Earth, the consequences would not be local. They'd be global. Debris from destroyed satellites would endanger thousands of others. Internet access could collapse. Financial systems could be thrown into chaos. Power grids could be disrupted through loss of timing signals. The world could be plunged into a silent, invisible catastrophe. But perhaps the most dangerous aspect is ambiguity. A glitch, a flare, or an unexpected satellite maneuver could be misinterpreted as an attack. Without rapid verification or reliable communication channels, nations may retaliate, triggering a conflict no one wanted to start. This is why so many experts are sounding the alarm. Despite how close we are to weaponizing space fully, there are few updated treaties, almost no enforceable rules, and little transparency. The existing Outer Space Treaty was signed in 1967. Before the first man set foot on the Moon. It doesn't account for cyber warfare, AI-controlled satellites, or space mining colonies guarded by defense systems. The reality is this: without immediate international dialogue, space will become not just a war zone but the first strike zone in any future global conflict. So what can be done? Infinity Beyond believes that public awareness is the first step. People must realize that space is not just a science fiction fantasy. It's an active, vulnerable, and militarized environment. We must call on our leaders to negotiate new agreements, establish red lines, and build mechanisms for conflict de-escalation in orbit. Imagine a future where spacefaring nations come together, not just to avoid war, but to protect the shared sky above us all. A future where space is treated as a global commons, not a battlefield. A future where innovation leads not to destruction, but to connection. Because the stars were never meant to be divided by borders, nor darkened by war. They were meant to guide us forward. If you've enjoyed this series, subscribe to Infinity Beyond. We'll continue to explore the frontiers of science, technology, and the unknown, one episode at a time. Stay curious, stay aware, and remember, Space is no longer the final frontier. It's the next one. Welcome to Infinity Beyond. Today, we embark on a journey to explore a domain that has slowly transformed from a realm of scientific curiosity to a potential battlefield, the vast expanse of outer space. Space has become a hotly contested battlefield, and I don't just mean that metaphorically. Imagine space stations armed with cannons, satellites equipped with lasers, and missiles designed not only to destroy targets, but also to intercept enemy weapons in orbit. These are not just fantasies from science fiction. They are real, and many of them have already been launched into orbit by the world's leading superpowers. Although a full-scale war in space has not yet occurred, major countries have long prepared for such a possibility. For decades, nations have designed and tested a variety of space-based weapon systems. They've equipped their satellites with defensive and offensive capabilities, planning for a violent conflict above our atmosphere. The militarization of space isn't a new concept. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union both explored using outer space as a strategic platform. They feared losing their satellites, those crucial eyes in the sky, so they prepared for orbital warfare. Some of these preparations included experimental anti-satellite missiles, space mines, and directed energy weapons. Today, these ambitions have only grown. Modern military strategies now include detailed plans for space dominance. The United States Space Force, for instance, was created not only to monitor space activity, but to ensure military superiority beyond Earth's surface. China and Russia have responded in kind, rapidly expanding their own space programs and developing technologies that could threaten the satellites of rival nations. But why is space so important? In modern warfare, space-based assets are critical. From GPS-guided missiles to real-time battlefield surveillance, from secure communications to global weather tracking, satellites play an irreplaceable role. Knocking out just a few of these systems could blind an entire military operation. The concern is not just about destruction. The real danger lies in disruption. Space warfare doesn't have to be explosive. It can be as subtle as cyber attacks on satellite networks, electronic jamming, or even the use of robotic arms to disable rival devices. All of this raises crucial questions. Who controls space? Who enforces the rules? International agreements like the Outer Space Treaty of 1967 prohibit the placement of nuclear weapons in orbit and promote peaceful use. But in reality, loopholes exist, and the treaty lacks enforcement mechanisms. As technology evolves, countries reinterpret these agreements to fit their strategic needs. In recent years, we've seen tests of anti-satellite weapons that have created dangerous debris fields in orbit. These floating clouds of space junk threaten all space activity, from military satellites to commercial ventures and even crewed missions. Infinity Beyond invites you to imagine a future where space is no longer a sanctuary for science, but a battleground where the next global conflict could unfold. The line between science fiction and reality is thinner than ever. Stay with us as we dive deeper into this militarized cosmos in the next chapter of our exploration. Welcome back to Infinity Beyond. In this chapter, we journey into the historical roots of space militarization, a legacy that began not with cooperation, but with suspicion, competition, and Cold War tension. The seeds of space warfare were planted during the Cold War, when the United States and the Soviet Union viewed outer space not only as a scientific frontier, but as a strategic high ground. With the launch of Sputnik in 1957, the Soviet Union shocked the world. It wasn't just a beeping satellite, it was a message. We can reach orbit, and perhaps beyond. This singular event spurred an arms race that was no longer confined to Earth. Suddenly, the skies weren't enough. Both superpowers rushed to develop ballistic missiles that could arc through space. They tested warheads capable of re-entering Earth's atmosphere with devastating speed and accuracy. Space became the ultimate high ground, one from which you could strike anywhere on the planet. By the 1960s, the concept of mutually assured destruction extended into orbit. Military strategists speculated on deploying nuclear weapons in space. Though treaties later forbade such actions, the mere thought shaped decades of policy and paranoia. Behind closed doors, the United States initiated programs like Project Thor, a theoretical system of rods from God that would drop tungsten rods from orbit, creating kinetic strikes equivalent to nuclear explosions without radioactive fallout. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union experimented with orbital weapons platforms, including the fractional orbital bombardment system designed to deliver warheads from space. The narrative was no longer about exploration. It was about domination. Intelligence satellites became the unseen eyes of war planners, feeding real-time surveillance to military leaders. Communications, early warning systems, and missile guidance increasingly relied on space-based technologies. Even the moon landings carried undertones of power. To plant your flag on another celestial body was more than a symbolic act. It was a demonstration of technological and ideological superiority. The moon was the high ground, and the nation that controlled it, in theory, could control Earth. As the 1980s dawned, the dream, or nightmare, of space-based defense grew more vivid. The Reagan administration's Strategic Defense Initiative, nicknamed Star Wars, proposed a web of orbital lasers and interceptors capable of shooting down nuclear missiles. Though much of the program was never built, it signaled intent. Space was a battlefield worth investing in. But the legacy of these Cold War programs didn't disappear with the Berlin Wall. Instead, their frameworks were inherited, studied, and expanded upon by new spacefaring powers. China, India, Israel, and others began developing their own anti-satellite capabilities, often citing Cold War-era doctrines. Today, we are witnessing a revival of that old rivalry, but this time with more players, more weapons, and fewer rules. The cosmos is no longer the domain of two superpowers. It's a crowded arena of ambition, fear, and high-stakes strategy. Infinity. Beyond believes history isn't just a story of what happened. It's a warning of what could return. As we peer into the past, we glimpse the future. A future that, without caution, could bring the Cold War back into orbit, hotter than ever. Join us in the next segment, where we explore the emerging technologies shaping tomorrow's space battles. Welcome to another eye-opening chapter from Infinity Beyond. We've explored the historical race to dominate the stars, but in this era, the battles of space are no longer about grand explosions or laser beams. Instead, they unfold in silence, through disruption, stealth, and digital sabotage. The modern space conflict is often invisible, fought not with brute force, but with lines of code, electromagnetic pulses, and orbital espionage. Unlike Cold War battleships or missile silos, the new warriors are satellites, devices no bigger than a refrigerator, orbiting high above us, conducting surveillance, relaying communication, and guiding precision weaponry. But just as these satellites enable modern life and defense systems, they also become critical targets. Imagine a military operation in the 21st century. Troops depend on GPS signals to navigate. Drones rely on live satellite feeds. Command centers coordinate through encrypted space-based links. Disable just one node in this network, and the mission could collapse. That's where space cyber warfare comes in. It might begin with jamming, a method as old as radio. By overwhelming a satellite's signals with noise, you can cut off communication temporarily. But more sophisticated attacks go deeper. Hackers, often state-sponsored, attempt to breach satellite control systems. Once inside, they might manipulate data, redirect the satellite, or even render it useless. In 2007 and 2008, reports surfaced that Chinese hackers gained access to U.S. Earth observation satellites through ground-based terminals. While no damage was done, it showed how vulnerable these critical systems were. And since then, such incidents have only grown in frequency and complexity. But the battlefield isn't limited to cyberspace. Consider the use of robotic arms in space. Originally developed for repair and docking operations, these tools can be repurposed. A satellite with a mechanical arm can grapple another satellite, disable it, or move it out of orbit. Russia's Cosmos 2542 was observed maneuvering unusually close to a U.S. spy satellite, behavior that raised alarms in military circles. Then there's laser dazzling, a non-destructive method of blinding satellite sensors. High-powered lasers, based on the ground or in orbit, can temporarily blind or damage sensitive optics. It's like shining a flashlight into a surveillance camera, but from thousands of kilometers away. And let's not forget orbital mines. While they sound like science fiction, concepts exist for small co-orbital objects that follow enemy satellites and activate when conflict begins. They don't need to explode. Just bumping into a satellite at orbital speed is enough to cause catastrophic failure. Even more concerning is that much of this activity is deniable. Attribution is difficult. Was a satellite's failure caused by a micrometeorite, a software glitch, or a targeted cyber attack? In the shadows of orbit, proof is elusive, making it hard to respond or deter future strikes. This ambiguity is dangerous. Without clear evidence or open communication, space incidents could escalate into Earth-bound conflicts. Furthermore, as more nations launch satellites, the congestion in orbit increases. Over 8,000 active satellites now circle Earth, with thousands more planned. With so many actors and machines in a limited area, the risk of accidental or intentional interference is higher than ever. But this invisible war isn't just between nations. Commercial satellites, which provide internet, TV, and navigation, are also targets. A major hack or jamming event could disrupt economies, paralyze transportation, or even impact global banking systems. So what can be done? Experts propose stronger international agreements to define and regulate space warfare. Others advocate for building more resilient systems, redundant satellites, hardened encryption, and better detection of anomalies. Some even suggest deploying space bodyguards, guardian satellites that patrol and protect valuable assets. At Infinity Beyond, we believe awareness is the first step. The public must understand that the space above is not empty. It's a crowded, contested domain, where silence doesn't mean peace. The war in space might not be seen with the naked eye, but its consequences would be felt across every corner of Earth. In our next episode, we'll examine the newest generation of space weapons: hypersonic gliders, orbital railguns, and kinetic kill vehicles that may redefine how battles are fought beyond our skies. Welcome back to Infinity Beyond. So far, we've seen how invisible space warfare is already being waged through hacking, interference, and orbital espionage. But what happens when stealth gives way to raw firepower? What weapons are being built for the day when open conflict erupts in orbit? The answer is as fascinating as it is terrifying. Let's start with hypersonic weapons. These are missiles that travel at speeds greater than Mach 5, 5 times the speed of sound. But their true danger lies not just in their velocity, but in their maneuverability. Unlike traditional ballistic missiles, which follow a predictable arc, hypersonic glide vehicles, HGVs, can change direction mid-flight, making them almost impossible to intercept. Russia's Avangard system, for instance, is said to be capable of traveling at Mach 20 while evading detection. The United States is developing similar platforms, and China has already conducted multiple tests of its own. These weapons may not spend much time in space, but they challenge every space-based early warning and defense system currently in place. To counter such threats, spacefaring nations are looking toward orbital kill vehicles, space-based interceptors designed to destroy incoming threats before they re-enter Earth's atmosphere. Imagine a network of satellites equipped with sensors, tracking data, and kinetic interceptors. At the first sign of a missile launch, they lock on, calculate trajectory, and fire a high-speed projectile to collide with the target. No explosives, just the devastating energy of speed and mass. This is called a hit-to-kill system. And it's real. The U.S. has tested versions under the Exo-Atmospheric Kill Vehicle (EKV) program. These devices are launched into space, lock onto their target, and collide with it directly, essentially punching it out of the sky. But space superweapons aren't limited to missiles. Other technologies being explored include directed energy weapons. These are high-powered lasers or microwaves mounted on satellites or drones. They could be used to disable or fry electronics from a distance, silently, instantly, and without any visible trace. Orbital railguns. Still mostly conceptual, these would use electromagnetic force to launch metal projectiles at incredible speeds. If built in space, they wouldn't face air resistance or gravity, making them incredibly efficient long-range weapons. Kinetic bombardment systems. Sometimes dubbed rods from God, these involve deploying tungsten rods from orbit. Upon re-entry, they generate the force of a small nuclear blast without any radiation or treaty violations. These systems are attractive precisely because they exploit loopholes in current space law. Of course, building and maintaining such weapons is extremely costly and technically complex. But the motivations are clear. The nation that controls the ultimate high ground, space, can dominate every other domain: land, sea, air, and cyberspace. And the race isn't just among the US, Russia, and China anymore. India, Japan, Israel, and even smaller nations like Iran and North Korea are rapidly expanding their space capabilities. Private companies, too, are entering the game, launching hundreds of satellites with potential dual-use applications. Space is being militarized in layers. Low Earth orbit becomes a battlefield of swarms. Hundreds of small satellites capable of surveillance, jamming, or physical disruption. Medium and high orbits host early warning systems and communications relays, prime targets in any major conflict. And beyond that lies cislunar space, the vast region between Earth and the Moon, now being eyed for military logistics, resource extraction, and strategic control. But with every new weapon comes a new risk. A missile test gone wrong could create debris fields that destroy civilian infrastructure. A space conflict could spill over into ground-based systems, shutting down the internet, disrupting power grids, or crashing financial markets. And let's not forget, space has no borders, no front lines. An attack on one satellite can impact dozens of others. The ripple effect could affect entire populations, without a single bullet being fired on Earth. Here at Infinity Beyond, we believe that knowledge is power. By understanding the weapons being built and the logic behind them, we can begin the conversation about responsibility, diplomacy, and the need for new international frameworks. In our next episode, we'll go even deeper, exploring the emerging battlefield of the Moon and Mars, and how these celestial bodies may become the next stage for territorial disputes and military expansion. Welcome back to Infinity Beyond. We've traveled through the shadows of orbital warfare and cutting-edge space weapons. Now let's push further, beyond Earth's orbit, to examine the rising military interest in the Moon and Mars. It might sound like a page from a science fiction novel, but military strategists are seriously discussing lunar and Martian frontlines. Why? Because whoever controls these celestial bodies may one day control the solar system's most valuable resources, and its most strategic points. Let's begin with the Moon. For decades, it was viewed purely through a scientific or symbolic lens. But that's changing. The Moon offers key advantages in future space operations. Its low gravity makes it an ideal staging ground for deep space missions. Its south pole harbors water ice, essential for life support and rocket fuel. And it provides a stable platform for telescopes, radar systems, and possibly military infrastructure. Some proposals suggest building moon-based early warning systems or communication relays shielded from Earth-based interference. Others go further, envisioning armored lunar outposts with missile defenses, drone fleets, and anti-satellite launch capabilities. China has already announced plans for a joint international moon base by the 2030s. The U.S. Artemis program includes goals that could dual-serve civilian and defense agendas. Russia, India, and private companies are also eyeing lunar missions with long-term ambitions. Now consider this. The 1967 Outer Space Treaty prohibits placing weapons of mass destruction in space, but it says little about conventional arms. There's also no provision that prevents the militarization of celestial surfaces like the Moon. Only peaceful use clauses, open to wide interpretation. This legal gray zone is a cause for concern. Without updates to international space law, the Moon could become the next militarized frontier. And beyond that, Mars. Though more distant, Mars presents long-term strategic opportunities. Its gravity well is deeper than the Moon's, but still lower than Earth's, making it a potential hub for mining, fuel depots, and even launch operations. But from a military standpoint, Mars is attractive because it's isolated, offering secrecy, independence, and a clean slate environment for testing technologies that might never be allowed near Earth. Imagine this: a remote Martian base equipped with AI-controlled defense drones, hypersonic recon vehicles, and autonomous railguns. In a crisis, such a facility could serve as a backup command center for Earth-based nations, or as a threat of last resort. It's a chilling thought, but one that's increasingly considered in strategic simulations. Let's not forget the role of private industry. Companies like SpaceX are rapidly developing the capacity for planetary colonization. While their stated missions are civilian, these infrastructures, launch pads, habitats, robotic systems could easily be adapted for defense purposes. The lines between commercial, scientific, and military activities in space are blurring. And what about the logistics? Military expansion to the Moon or Mars would require orbital supply lines, fuel depots, spaceports, and communication networks. Already, the U.S. Space Force is working with NASA on shared logistics strategies. China's military has direct control over its space program. Cooperation between civilian and defense sectors is accelerating globally. In this new era, the concept of space territory becomes more tangible. Just as nations once raced to plant flags in unclaimed lands, the next geopolitical contest may unfold across craters, lava tubes, and Martian plains. The risks are significant. Militarizing celestial bodies could lead to conflicts that are harder to control and even harder to recover from. Unlike Earth-based wars, space battles could affect entire regions of orbit or contaminate planets for centuries. At Infinity Beyond, we urge a forward-thinking approach. Space is vast, but our ambitions are growing even faster. If we don't establish new norms, laws, and mutual understandings, the Moon and Mars could become battlegrounds before they ever become homes. In the next episode, we'll turn from offense to defense, examining how countries are working to protect their assets in orbit and create resilient networks in an increasingly hostile space environment. Welcome back to Infinity Beyond. As we've seen in earlier chapters, space is rapidly evolving from a domain of exploration to a theater of potential conflict. But with every offensive capability developed, so too must come defenses. In this episode, we explore how countries are working to protect their critical space assets from the growing list of threats lurking above. Satellites are the nervous system of modern civilization. They enable everything from GPS navigation and banking to military reconnaissance and nuclear command and control. Disabling or disrupting these assets, either through collision, cyber attack, or jamming, can cripple a nation's economy or defense network in seconds. That's why defending satellites has become a top priority. Let's begin with situational awareness, the foundation of space defense. Nations are deploying a new generation of space surveillance systems. These include ground-based radar arrays, optical telescopes, and satellite-mounted sensors that track every object in orbit, from active satellites to tiny fragments of debris. The United States operates the U Space Surveillance Network, SSN, monitoring over 20,000 objects in orbit. China and Russia have similar systems, and private companies are now entering this field, providing high-resolution data to governments and commercial users alike. But awareness is only the first step. The next layer is resilience, designing satellites that can survive attack or disruption. This includes hardened electronics that resist electromagnetic pulses, advanced encryption to prevent hacking, and maneuverability to dodge threats. Some satellites now have autonomous capabilities to detect jamming or interference and switch frequencies or routes in response. Another strategy is redundancy. Rather than relying on a few large, expensive satellites, militaries are moving toward constellations of small, distributed satellites. These swarms are harder to disable because even if some are taken out, the rest continue operating. The U.S. Department of Defense has invested heavily in programs like Proliferated Warfighter Space Architecture, which envisions hundreds of low-orbit satellites working in unison. But passive defense isn't always enough. Some countries are now exploring active protection systems. Imagine a defense satellite equipped with small interceptor drones or non-lethal lasers designed to blind or nudge away approaching threats. There are also proposals for space-based bodyguards, miniature satellites that escort valuable assets and ward off suspicious objects. It's not just about protecting satellites, though. The ground infrastructure is just as vulnerable. Launch facilities, ground stations, and data relay networks are potential weak points. That's why integrated defense planning now includes cybersecurity, hardened control centers, and even mobile command units that can relocate in wartime. To coordinate all these efforts, countries are building dedicated command structures. The United States created Space Command, SpaceCom, and the United States Space Force to unify space operations and defense strategy. NATO has declared space a warfighting domain, and other countries are forming similar organizations. Their mission is clear: protect their nation's interests above Earth's atmosphere. International collaboration also plays a role. In recent years, there has been an uptick in space security cooperation. The Combined Space Operations Center, CSPOC, includes members from the US, UK, Canada, Australia, and others, sharing data and coordinating responses to threats. Yet despite all these measures, the challenges remain immense. One key issue is debris. The more satellites and weapons we launch, the greater the risk of Hall-Kessler syndrome, a runaway chain reaction of collisions that could render whole orbits unusable for decades. That's why part of defending space means cleaning it up. Nations and companies are developing debris removal systems, from robotic arms and nets to laser-pushed deflection methods. And then there's the legal battlefield. Current treaties are vague and outdated. There's no formal agreement on what counts as an act of war in space. Is a laser that temporarily blinds a satellite an act of aggression? What about a cyber attack on a ground station? This ambiguity is dangerous. Without clear definitions and enforcement mechanisms, the space domain risks spiraling into chaos during a crisis. Here at Infinity Beyond, we emphasize that defense is not just about weapons. It's about foresight, cooperation, and responsible stewardship of the most critical domain of the 21st century. In our final chapter, we'll confront the ultimate question. Are we on the brink of the first real space war? And if so, what will it look like?